With the patch today, it looks like we finally have full information on what the Avengers 1 million BC season that is going to be coming in March will actually look like. It has a wide variety of different new and interesting cards that only just got data mined, and I think this is about the last time they're going to have a chance to change any of them, so we can be pretty sure that the cards that are going to come out in March are going to look a lot like the ones that we're going to talk about in this video. But as always, please do remember, data mines are never actually final, and they are subject to change. With all of that said, let's jump into some of the most exciting cards I've seen in a long time. First up is Agamotto, who seems to be on the season pass. This is a card that does not have a release schedule in the spotlight caches and is very complex and weird. That also seems strong, which seems to me like it is a likely season pass card candidate. He is a 5'10", and you'll notice that he doesn't seem to have any text in the data mines, but that's mostly just a printing error. What he does is he shuffles in multiple spells into your deck, as well as being a 5'10", these spells will do things. I think of him as almost a combination of Thanos and Nico Minoru, or maybe a fixed Thanos is a better way to think about it. Instead of his spells being one-cost cards that stay on the board, they range in cost from 1 to 5, it seems, and they have very different effects, and they do not stay on the board. Spell number 1 is Temporal Manipulation. It gives Agamotto 3 additional power and draws him from the deck if you do not actually have him in your hand or in play. That's pretty sick, honestly. A 1 energy, draw a card, gain 3 power is a very relevant thing. Now, when you're talking about, do I want to run Agamotto, one of the things that you're going to have to think about is it worth the consistency loss? Because these cards are getting added to your deck and they aren't, for the most part, actually drawing cards, they need to be strong enough for you to want to run them generally, or you need to have a specific desire to have the effects of 2 or 3 of them to do something incredibly strong. Now, I do think that is possible, but it is good news for Agamotto that at least one of these cards is able to reduce his issues that could cause, oh, my deck is too large, I don't consistently do anything. That is the major downside of a card like this, and so it's good that they're thinking in that direction while not making him a direct clone of Thanos whose spells are able to counterbalance that because they mostly draw cards. At 2, Winds of Watoomb is the biggest Afflict card we have seen in a very long time. This is the first time I think they've written the words -5 power on any card. Now, notably, there are cards like Lasher that can afflict things that are up to this amount, but I don't think we've ever actually seen it happen. The fact that this can also move stuff right means that this card actually strikes me as not necessarily a reasonable counter to Iron Man, but you're certainly going to be like a little bit confused when stuff like that happens. Moving to the right makes it not just a good Afflict card, but a potentially reasonable Clog card. Sort of like if Stegron was way better, right? This costs 2, it's effectively got 5 power, and it can really mess up things that depend on positioning. I think this card actually seems quite strong. It's in line with what these spells would need to be in order to justify the fact that you're making your deck larger without additional ways to draw cards. This one seems like a very powerful spell. Bolts of Balthakk, other than sounding like what Mike Tyson might do to you if you get on his bad side, is a card that seems really interesting once we get into like maybe a Wong synergy here. This is a ton of energy, and energy does matter in Marvel Snap, although it matters less than people think it matters, I think. Because energy is one of the only things that's on cards, people think energy discounts or energy ramp tends to be like the strongest possible thing to do without really taking into account that you still need cards to play with that energy, you still need board spaces with which those cards can go, and you still need to win when you aren't doing your ridiculous Wong combo with this card. That said, this is the exact kind of card that can get out an Agamotto a turn early, right? This is a card you play on 3 that gives you the extra energy the next turn, so you have 4 extra energy. You have the ability to play Agamotto in a 3-drop, stuff like that. You can get 6 drops down early. The question is, how often is that actually worth doing? because you're going to be exposing a big card to a potential Shang-Chi or whatever it is that you're going to be doing, you do run additional risks at getting these cards out early. A lot of the time, the best time to have the most energy and the most options is the last turn of the game, which means that maybe this card could be valuable played on turn 5. You save this a little later, your turn 6 is just absolutely massive, you have 10 energy. As long as you have the ability to do something with that energy, you can do really strong stuff. However, since you are a deck running spells like this, it's entirely possible that you won't have the density of stuff to do to pay off your incredible amount of extra energy. This also does require taking a bit of a turn off, and that is relevant as well. Images of Ikonn is a 4-cost spell that transforms all of your other cards at this location into the strongest one you have. There are a couple really interesting applications for this, doing stuff like transforming your location into claws, or something like transforming your location into 10 power guys so your scar costs 0, or things of that nature. This is a card that seems quite strong, but it is worth pointing out, this is a 4-cost spell, and it does not have a body attached to it on its own. All of these spells, for the record, get banished no matter what. You can't Cosmo them in order to keep them on the board or anything like that. The banishment just happens as a part of them being spells, apparently. So what that means is that this is a 4-0 on reveal that has no synergy with all of the stuff that a 4-0 on reveal like this would normally have synergy with. Stuff like Cersei, if this was a normal on reveal, would be amazing here, and it just absolutely is not, nor can it be. And I think that is intentional, right? These are there's a lot of reasonable worry, I think, where if you make a bunch of cards that have on reveals that are 0 power, that downside gets alleviated by cards like Blink, by cards like Cersei. Making a card like this, on the other hand, means that you can't really cheat it. And that has, implications, right? It's good design, but it also, the ability to cheat stuff like that tends to be what competitive decks are built around. Doing something that is really pushing the boundary of, is this fair or not? Taking something that was intended to be played one way and playing it in a way that the downside is totally alleviated. I think that this is still going to be strong, but the lack of ways to genuinely abuse Agamotto, to actually do something more than what is written on the card, I think is actually notable. The way in which these spells are unable to be abused the same way you would want. I don't know what happens if you put them in a lockjaw. Maybe that works, but maybe not. And so, if there's not a way to, combine these spells with something else, I mean, look at Thanos, right? Thanos is all about abusing the created cards. You have Mockingbird, you have Blue Marvel, you have sometimes Khazar, or you're playing a Destroy Thanos where you're using it to abuse them and get death cheaper, right? You're doing something to double up the effect, to build around it. And when I look at Agamotto, what I see is, you build around it by building towards what's on the card. There's not a way to, go all in and abuse it. There is also one other spell that currently has no Datamined effect. It is costing at 5. It is called Flames of the Faltine. No relation to Saltine Crackers. And this is probably the make or break card for the card, where it's I look at it now and I'm all right, I can see this, but it's either going to be extremely worth putting in my deck because all the spells are good, or not worth putting in my deck because I can't build toward it, which puts it in a really odd spot where it's this could be the next staple Iron Patriot type card, but I find it hard to believe it's going to be a deck the way Thanos or Arishem is, because those decks are so able to build to abuse what they give you, right? This is not the kind of thing that has hooks in the way those cards do. Maybe it does and I'm just missing them, but I think that this is a card that has a massive delta in terms of where it could actually land. I might be alone in this, but when I look at this card, I could see something that isn't actually going to be worth running in a lot of stuff, but we won't figure that out for a month. That's entirely possible. I could also see people figuring out much later that there were specific good things to do with it that are worth it. Either way, The base rate on this card is quite nice, and the question is going to be how much it's worth sacrificing in terms of, are the spells going to be worth drawing? How can you make a deck where all the spells are always good? That's going to be the real question. I think it's going to be possible, but I don't know if it's going to be likely. If you can, you might have the new mid-range deck du jour on hand. If you can't, I don't know. First up in the spotlight caches, according to the datamines, is Eson. Eson is a 6/9 with a perpetual ability, not an ongoing, not an on reveal, just a thing that happens. At the end of each turn, you may put a card from your hand onto the board as long as that card did not start in your deck. So Arishem obviously gets to play this guy on 6, gets multiple guys, gets to play this guy on 5, gets multiple guys out there. That's really strong. But what about something like Nick Fury? Nick Fury plus this card plus any ramp card means that you're getting multiple 6s onto the board. And that's pretty strong, actually. It's just like you're going to need to win another lane at some point. But that still does seem like the kind of thing that'd be very difficult to actually meaningfully deal with. Additionally, at 6/9, there's no good way of stopping him. This is a card that comes down and you're just like, well, they're getting 2 6s in that lane. If that comes down on 5, you even Electro. It's like Electro, Nick Fury, Eson. It's like that actually seems kind of decent, right? That's not bad. As long as you figure out a way to win literally whatever other lane. And that's kind of fascinating to me. There's a world in which you go Electro, Nick Fury, Eson, Arnim Zola, 50-50ing that or whatever. That seems pretty sick too. I don't know exactly if this card is going to be good. It strikes me as the kind of card that's a little bit clunky, but if people are able to figure out a compelling and strong way to actually get it to show up on turn 5 with a Nick Fury, it's going to be really strong. The problem is, and I think this is a relevant one, is that the best ways of doing that are Wiccan and Arishem. And Wiccan seems plausible, but then how are you going to play the Nick Fury to actually get the value out of it, right? And then Arishem seems plausible, but you can play the Nick Fury, but you got to also make sure you get all the other created cards out of your hand too. I do think it's pretty likely that this guy ends up as an Arishem staple and maybe brings Nick Fury into the deck. Just seems like a pretty free thing to be happening, but Arishem tends to struggle when it sort of runs out of resources to play, and this guy could pull your resources to lanes where you don't want them to go going late into the game. So it's going to be good when you're doing all the stuff you want to do normally and generating a ton of cards and creating them, but it's going to be worse when you are unable to do that stuff and you need all your cards in hand for the final turn of the game and you need to allocate them the right way. I do think this probably makes the cut in Arishem, at least at first, but we'll have to see how people are able to actually build to abuse it before we can actually be sure. Seems fairly strong, though. Next up is Starbrand, a 3/10 that says your opponent has +3 power in every location. Now, I think a lot of people might look at this and say, well, that's not a very good trade, right? This is an ongoing ability, so yes, I can Enchantress it, yes, I can Zero it, yes, I can Sauron it, yes, I can do all of that stuff. But also it's this is a 3/1, right? I'm giving them 9 power, I'm getting 10 power. But I think it's worth talking about the specific context in which this is a 3/10, which is to say, A, if you disable its ability, but B, there is a deck right now that really wants to get a Scar to 0 cost and really only has 1 3-drop and then a Psylocke into a 4-drop as a way of making that happen. That deck also plays Ares, which loves having big guys' numbers in the deck. And of course, it is worth pointing out that in terms of the dynamic here, this is not going to be a 3/1 at the locations you want to win. It's going to be a 3/4 at the locations you want to win, because you can just be like, look, I don't care about the +3 power here. I'm putting too much power at 2 locations. It doesn't really matter. I do think this is a really interesting card because on base rate, it doesn't look like it's the world's greatest card, but once you dive into the context of how well it works with Scar, of how well it is able to allow you to get to that Scar and to really start powering out cheap beaters later in the game, of once you get to the context of the fact that does 3 power actually matter all that much when you're putting 10s in each lane on every turn of the game? How much are you caring about that 3 power? This is a really, really interesting card, and it is One of the cards where I look at that and I'm just like, wow, I'm not really sure what they were like. Not like I'm not sure what they're going for. I know exactly what they're going for, but I'm not like sure they should be as confident they are that this card won't be a problem, basically. Because I already think the Scar deck is a problem. One of the major problems it has is that it's extremely easy to play. This card is extremely easy to play. Like, it's a very easy to play card in a deck that is easy to play, and it goes straight for the throat in terms of ramping up that deck strategy and making it more likely that it does the thing that is unfair at the end of the game. This seems like a very relevant card that is going to come out and immediately go into the Scar deck, and I don't know if it'll go anywhere else, but it is, I think, a massive improvement over Typhoid Mary in every single deck that is currently playing Sauron, which is not many, but we have seen people playing around with it. The card seems very strong, the Scar stuff seems genuinely potentially problematic, and there's some big numbers coming down the pipe when it comes to what this card is going to be able to make happen. Shout out to Mobius and Mobius for at least existing, because otherwise everyone is getting free 10s dumped on them at the final turn of the game. Firehair is a 2/3 with an ability that says whenever one of your other cards is destroyed, repeat its on reveal. There's a lot of exciting cards in this season. Firehair is the one that strikes me as potentially the most broken. And I say this because there's a lot of good Misery decks already. A lot of decks that are very happy to be playing Misery. Firehair says, hey, that Misery that you're playing, you actually just get a second copy of it. Now, this is potentially less broken than you think, right? A lot of what Misery is doing is making guys and putting them in your hand with the hood. Obviously, you'd love to have a second demon, but it's not necessarily make or break enough for you to want to run a 2/3 in order to make that happen. So what else can we do with a card that does something like this? What other directions can we build? Can we make a Firehair Misery deck that is built around doing this? What happens if you have a Cosmo in the Firehair lane? Does that actually stop the Firehair from going off? Does the on reveal ability happen on Firehair, or does it happen like as an on reveal ability? I think it should stop it. My instinct is like, because it says this uses that card's on reveal, I would think that it would stop it, but I genuinely don't actually know. There's some really interesting stuff that this card can do. I like that they keep playing around in this space where you have, obviously like the more basic versions of playing around in this space are like Absorbing Man, and then you have Grandmaster, and then you have this card. And it's like, I do think that these cards are very often more exciting theoretically than they tend to be in practice. And so when I look at this card and I get really excited theoretically, I do have an obligation, I think, to point out that, hey, like, this has happened before. People have gotten really excited about theoretically doubling up on a bunch of stuff, and it's never really paid off. And I still look at this card and I'm like, wow, I feel like there's got to be something stupid I can do with this. And so this is a card where I want the community to figure this one out, because I'm not really the best at exploring unknown archetypes. My talents lie in tuning mostly. And so when I see a card like this where the possibilities are just endless, it's like, I need somewhere to start. I need something to grab onto. I think the Misery stuff could work, but it's not going to be as good as people think it is, because the other part of what Misery does is, like, repeat Iron Patriot lanes. This card's not great at doing that, but I guess if I'm Miserying an Iron Patriot lane, having 2 Iron Patriots could be relevant, but then my hand starts getting really full. It's weird, because I think the best Misery deck right now is the one that is the Iron Patriot V-Hand deck, and that's really good, but it's like, I'm not really getting big Miseries off there. That's not really like what that deck is about, so I don't know if this card's going to be worth it in there. It could be. It's very realistic that it could be. But it almost feels like this wants to be more all in on being a combo than run in like a small package. And when running stuff in a small package is like typically the best way to get something out of these cards, yeah, I can understand why I'm a little apprehensive about this, but it does seem like it has a lot of potential. Last up is Khonshu, who is kind of like they put Apocalypse and Hela in a blender, and then we're like, what up? It's this. So Khonshu is a 6/5 that has 3 different states. Extremely cool and flavorful. Starts as just Khonshu, then goes to waxing, the waxing moon, and then goes to full like the full moon. To move him from state to state, you have to discard him, which is the apocalypse part of this. At each state, he gains stats, and so does the card he revives. So we have this Khonshu that when it is discarded, it gets stronger, and then it revives something stronger as well. So it starts out with 6-5, and the card it revives gets set to 5. Then 6-7, and it revives a card and it sets it to 7. Finally 6-12, and it revives a card and sets it to 12. What I find interesting about this card is how am I going to be actually able to use it? What I also find interesting, though, is we've seen some small package Hela stuff recently, which is just basically playing Hela as the excuse to revive a Gore. And this seems like a really interesting way to do that, because I don't really care how much base power my Gore has. I will play a 6-5 that revives a 5 power Gore because he's still going to be 22 power or whatever, right? And so there's a wonder of like, can I just put this in my mid-range deck with something that discards Gore and then I just play that? And then I don't even really invest in the Khonshu part of all this. Like, I just like, maybe I'll play like Moon Knight with Khonshu and Gore, and that's it. And I actually think that they were probably thinking about that when they made the card that I'm about to show you next, who seems clearly meant to go with this season, but is not datamined for anything, so I'm sort of penciling him in speculatively as maybe an event reward during the season. This is the first Ghost Rider, a 2-6 that discards the lowest power card from your hand, and then removes that card's power from this. There are two questions that I have. The first is there anything to do with this card that isn't just being a Gore discard machine? This is a card that basically just says, discard your Gore if you have it in hand. That's what it says. The second is, how does discarding negative power work? Because there's also a world where this says, discard your Hobgoblin and I have 14 power. My instinct is that that probably doesn't work. I say this based on the way those cards work with Mr. Negative. You're not getting extra energy out of that -8. It just goes to 0. So I don't really think it's going to work, but I would be really, hopeful for it, I think. The realistic portion of this card is it is the Gore discard machine. And I'm already sort of in my head coming up with like, okay, we got Gore, we got Khonshu, we got the first Ghost Rider, we got Moon Knight. That's like the package. You put that package in your whatever, and you can maybe make like Goon Knight a la that, right? The issue with the Goon Knight deck has very often been not having enough power. This guy has plenty of power, A, and B, having Khonshu Gore is a really good solution to a disruptive deck that does not have a ton of endgame. So I'm actually pretty hopeful for what that deck can do. The ability to discard your opponent's cards is extremely relevant and usually only held back by how much power we can back it up with. This seems like a really good opportunity to have some really strong power in a good disruptive deck. I'm pretty hopeful for the combination of these two cards. On their own, not so much. Together, Khonshu and the first Ghost Rider might be one of the scariest things we've ever seen in Marvel Snap. So that is what we know about Avengers 10 million BC, 1 million BC. I get confused by the numbers. Is it 10 million or 1 million? I think it's 1 million because 10 million BC seems like way too long ago, but it's comics, so maybe it's 10 million and I'm just an idiot. As always, I have been KM Best. Thank you for sticking with me on a Datamined video. I truly appreciate it. You have a wonderful day. And for those I didn't say it to yesterday or the day before, you have been phenomenal, and I truly appreciate you. I wanted to give you all a reminder that I have a podcast, the KM Best Podcast. You can find it on YouTube and Spotify right now, and please do check it out. We just hit 1,000 subscribers, so I'm finally actually able to monetize it. But I've gotten a bunch of comments saying, Cam, you should probably say something about it on the main channel, and yeah, I should probably say something about it on the main channel, so please do go and check that out. Thank you so much. I've been KM Best. You've been phenomenal. And I realized there were actually more data mines that came out today, but it was so much between like Agamotto being 5 cards and the other Datamined cards being so many cards that I felt like it was best to talk about them in the context of this is the March season, and then maybe we'll get another video where we talk about what we learned about the April season, because that's also pretty crazy. Thank you so much. I've been KM Best. Remember to look forward to that video, and I'll see you in the next one.